How's everybody tonight? So I'm gonna speak really quickly at first to catch us back on schedule. I'm not. It's too hot. It's too hot to do that. So before I jump into the slideshow, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk a lot about language, and so you see me now, and I'm assuming that the thing that jumps out to you most when you look at me is my hair. No, that's not true. Well, wait, just wait. I'm not giving anything away, but just wait. So I'm in a wheelchair, big surprise. I got hit by a car when I was 2. And I'm 57 now. I'm actually 57 and 6 days. So I just turned, anyway, it's taken a while to get used to, thank you. So when I first got hurt, I lived in a really small town in southern Indiana. And the hospital I went to eventually was called Shriners Hospital for Crippled Children. Okay? So again, I have a spinal cord injury at level T10. I was a crippled child. That was when I was 2. So I went from being a cripple, don't use that word. I went from being a cripple to handicapped, to handicapable, to physically challenged, to differently able, to experiencing a disability, to now I am in society largely known as a person with a disability. So if you think about that journey from cripple to person, it's taken about 55 years. And I'm going to tell you a secret. My condition hasn't changed. But the way people talk about me and other people with disabilities absolutely has. You hear a word like cripple, wow, right? And it was not until the late 1990s that Shriners changed that name. Now they're just Shriners Hospital for Children, or Shriners Hospital. And I'll tell you that when you're a patient at Shriners, you're called a Shriners kid. And when I was a Shriners kid, every holiday season I would get a gift from Shriners. And looking back on it, the favorite gift I ever got from Shriners was what's called an LP, a record album. And the title of that record album was, "You'll Never Stand as Tall as When You Stoop to Help a Crippled Child." Now, I'm going to leave you with that just for a second and jump into the slideshow. So I work for a company called Relay Resources. As Bill said, we provide meaningful work for people with disabilities. We do that in a number of social enterprises. We employ about 600 people, but about 500 of them have qualifying disabilities. What makes Relay unique is that we operate on what we call a culture of love. And that might sound creepy. I don't mean it to sound creepy. What it means is that we welcome people with disabilities. We support people with disabilities. We encourage people with disabilities, many of whom have never held jobs before, many of whom have been told that they will never work. And we want to help people with disabilities, me included, become the best people that we can be, to live the fullest life. So that's what we call a culture of love. So a little bit more about me. That's me 15 years ago. That's my title. I use he, him, his pronouns. There I go, spinal cord. Andrew, you know all this. You didn't know I'm married with a kid. That's quite surprising to a lot of people, which I don't take personally. Okay, that was a joke. I'm really funny. I'm really funny. See, I get it. That's a mercy laugh, and I'll take it. So what I mean by that, I'm not as funny as I think I am. But disability is really hard to talk about. But because I've been a person with a disability or whatever for 55 years, I'm very comfortable talking about it. And I try to be funny so that people laugh and have a good time and get distracted and don't worry about this awful topic that we're talking about. Because here's a little secret, it's not that awful a topic. So before I go on, I want to acknowledge what we talked about earlier, COVID. COVID changed everything for a lot of people, especially for people with disabilities. That's the longest my hair has ever been. 9 months into COVID, that was my hair. That's what COVID did to me. But in all seriousness, when COVID first was announced, there were a lot of reports and a lot of concern about people with disabilities not receiving care. There was not enough PPE, so we didn't get PPE. There were not a ton of hospital rooms, so if we were unfortunate enough to catch COVID, the concern was that we wouldn't receive care. And people with disabilities, lots of people took longer to get vaccinations because of the requirements of administering vaccination and keeping them frozen and all that sort of stuff. People with disabilities felt left out. And not just for people with disabilities, it's my theory that COVID changed everything, changed the way we live. So I just want to acknowledge that by showing you my hair at the time. Before we go on, so I'm not kidding, I'm not as funny as I think I am, but I am very capable of talking too much. And the way that you can help me by that is if you have questions, raise your hands, blurt them out, whatever you want to do, yell at me. If you have a question, ask, okay? Great. So what we're going to do tonight, hopefully, is gain familiarity with some terms. I'm going to introduce you to language, which I've already done a little bit. And we're going to gain comfort talking about disability. So disability doesn't just look like me. The international symbol for disability, everybody knows what that is a person in a wheelchair, right? You see it every time you go to the ADA parking spot. I'm going to tell you a secret. I was the model for that. Thank you. I was not the model. But disability doesn't just look like somebody in a wheelchair, okay? And that logo, here's the definition of disability according to the Americans with Disabilities Act. That logo, the person in a wheelchair, is a great way to convey a message, but it's a very harmful logo. Because if a person has a disability but doesn't use a wheelchair, they're likely to spend a lot of time explaining to others that they do in fact have a disability. It's just non-visible. So, true or false? This is an easy one. True or false? Most disabilities are obvious. You can see false, right? All right, so let's talk about that. Thank you for that. So according to the CDC, 27% of people in this country have a disability. That's during COVID, because I don't think COVID is over. I may be in the minority, but that's during COVID. 1 out of every 4 people. It used to be 1 out of every 5 people. Okay, so I want to talk about that just a little bit. Okay, when I say 25% is 1 out of every 4 people. If you were lucky enough to go to a what that means is if you were lucky enough to go to a Trailblazers game with Bill and I, right, when we worked with the Trailblazers, and you were sitting in the stands, if the person next to you didn't have a disability, then the person on the other side of them or on the other side of you did. 1 out of every 4 people. Now, and this is a joke, but what's the message there?
It's not unusual.
Close. We are everywhere, and we're taking over. That's a joke. I told you that was a joke, so don't panic. We're not. Okay. So according to the World Health yes?
The other thing is we don't know how to spot you guys.
Sorry again?
And the problem is we don't know how to spot you guys. We're going to take over the earth.
That's right. That's right. So be on your best behavior. Okay? I'm speaking on behalf of all my friends. So worldwide, it's more than 1 billion people. More than 1 billion people, way more than 1 billion people. So I'm going to drill this in. So 12.8% of the population has a cognitive disability. 12.1% has a disability that limits their mobility. And then here are some other numbers. And what I don't have on here is about 5% of the population of adults has a mental health condition that is qualifying as a disability. And remember, disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Who can name a major life activity? There are 27 of them. Walking is one, right? That's easy. Sorry?
Reading.
Reading is another.
Bathing.
Bathing, taking care of yourself, right? Sitting is one. Driving could be one. Working, there are 27 of them. So something that substantially limits one of those might qualify as a disability. And it's my theory that most people, a lot of people, I don't know if it's most, a lot of people have a condition that limits one or more major life activity, but they don't think that they have a disability. Because other than parking, there's not a lot of bonus to admitting that you have a disability. That normally gets a laugh. That got a laugh in Tualatin.
Okay, the parking. You can hardly find a place if it's busy.
That's true. That's true. There should be more of them. I totally agree. Okay, so we have an image in our head of what disability is, right? It's, like I said, a physical or mental impairment. And we know what disability means. Traditionally, it has meant weakness, right? Traditionally, it has meant crippled. There, I use that word again. I won't use it again. Traditionally, it has been very limiting, okay? So I'm going to talk about a different way to think about disability. So this is a very easy question, and you know all these answers. What do people with disabilities want? What's that?
No disability.
You know what? That's not true. Lots of people with disabilities said wouldn't trade it for anything, because we have perspective, we have experience, all sorts of stuff. But that's a common belief. But what we want, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of all people with disabilities everywhere. I have that permission. Respect. We want love. We want to be loved. We want to hit the snooze button. Who here doesn't like to sleep in? Anybody? Oh, that's what I thought. Okay. We want opportunity. We want more vacation days. And again, that's my story. We want pay raises if we're working. And here's a secret. Most of us don't work. Since the ADA, when the ADA passed about 33 years ago, Americans with Disabilities Act, when it passed, what segment of the population, of the US population, was least educated and least employed? What segment? Anybody? People with disabilities. Now, 33 years later, what segment of the population is least educated and least employed?
Persons with disabilities.
Persons with disabilities, that's right. So we've seen some progress during COVID, actually, not relative to education, but relative to employment. People with disabilities the unemployment rate is about 3 times that of people without disabilities. And most people with disabilities just don't even look for work. Relay's trying to change that. We'll get more to that. So it turns out what people with disabilities want is the same thing that people without disabilities want, right? Because if we're being honest, lots of those things are true for everyone in this room and everyone who you know. So a different way to think about all these things is to think about the word access. What we want is accessibility. This is a definition that I looked up, I can't remember where, giving equitable access to everyone along the continuum of human experience. It's not just physical access. It's not just digital access. It is, in my opinion, the most important, social access. So social access means comfort in talking in social situations to anyone, to everyone, right? So my last job before I worked at Relay, I worked at OHSU. We've all heard of OHSU, Portland's largest employer. My first job at OHSU was to teach people there how to talk to people like me. For employment, for patient care, for education, right? And I'll tell you, here's a secret. The easiest way to start a conversation with somebody with a disability is to just say hi. It's that simple, right? And we'll talk more. I'll give you some more clues later. But the concept of social accessibility was created by a guy from New York City who is blind, who's a very, very accomplished professional designer, and he has a service animal. One day he had a business trip to go from New York City to Miami. And like a lot of people in New York then, before Uber, he called a cab, right? Calling the cab was accessible. He could do it. He made the appointment. The cabbie showed up. He picked him up. The cabbie drove to the airport. And when he got to the airport, here's what the cabbie did. Before he opened the cab door, the cab driver door, he yelled, "This man needs help, this man needs help, this man needs help." And then he went around the back of the cab, grabbed the guy who had his service dog with him and who had booked his trip to Miami, yelling as he grabbed him, "This guy needs help, this guy needs help, this guy needs help," all the way into the terminal. So you can imagine the chaos that created externally, right, for the people at the terminal. Imagine what it would do to the person who had been assaulted and battered and drug into, with his service animal, into the airport. And it was that person's theory that until the cab driver and everybody else gets comfortable with people like him, people with a disability, the rest doesn't matter. Because he should be able, I should be able, anybody with a disability should be able to live their life without that. And that's what he called social accessibility. And I agree that that is very, very, very important. So there are lots of ways to get to social accessibility. Let's talk about language. You heard me use an example of person-first language. Person with a disability, right? Person with a spinal cord injury, person who uses a wheelchair, person who's blind, right? It's very simple. And then there's identity. So that's person-first language. That's one way to talk about disability. And the other is identity first, right? And this was more common, crippled child. Oh, I did it again. I said I wouldn't, and I did it. I'm sorry. I've ruined it. I'm going to try to not use it. So blind person, deaf person, using the disability or the condition as an adjective. So here are some examples. Person first, I did a bunch of them. Are there any cyclists in here tonight? Okay, well, you're a person too. You're a person who rides a bike. We hate you. In Portland, we hate you, but you're a person too. No one's ever going to raise their hand again. I'm so sorry. All right, I apologize. No more jokes until the next one, I promise. So, and then identity first, and this is a little bit confusing, and this may be a little bit surprising. So, a neurodiverse person, right? So, the people who are neurodiverse often like to say that their neurodiversity defines them, right? So, an autistic person, not a person with autism. Generally, that's true. Deaf people, capital D, deaf. People who call themselves capital D, deaf person, don't consider deafness a disability.
So I have a question. So are you, just backing up a little bit, are you saying that some people, like there's a neurodiverse person, might choose to describe themselves that way?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I'm sorry, I'm going to make this as hard as I possibly can, because A, you can't tell if somebody's got a disability,
Yeah.
right? And B, you can't tell what kind of language they use, right? So how do you know? Well, you could ask them, or it can come up, right? You can just say hi, yeah, right, perfect. Somebody's listening.
So this sounds like pronouns. You talk to people the way they want to be talked to.
Absolutely. It's very much like pronouns. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a secret about pronouns and about this language in just a minute. So this is a hard thing for people to remember. Neither is right all the time, right? When I'm talking to people who I know well, maybe other people with disabilities, I might describe myself as that word I said I wouldn't use anymore. I might say disabled person, right? I try not to when I'm talking to people who I don't know very well, because I love person-first language, because to me it speaks about the potential of people. You see the person, not the disability, right? That's the way I look at it. So I almost always try to use person-first language. Okay? So let's talk about another type of language. And this is by far more common, and this is one that we use every day, all the time. I bet I've used it 10 times tonight, right? It's ableist language, right? So ableism is a form of discrimination that believes people who have a disability or a deficiency or something about their body that makes it not normal, then they're not as good, right? And it's dismissive language. It can be very insulting language, but it's very, very common. Can I give you an example of ableist language? Tonight, I really want to put my best foot forward. That is ableist language, because not everybody can put their best foot forward. In fact, I can't put my best feet forward. I can't move my legs, right? I can, however, go for a walk. I can't go for a walk, but I use that phrase all the time. It's very confusing, right? But ableist language is pervasive. And I use some examples there that aren't too bad, but here are some languages, some examples that are much, much worse. And I've been thinking about this a lot. The phrase, that first phrase, the blind leading the blind, right? Effectively, that is a bad thing. In that phrase, blind leading the blind is a very bad thing. We don't want that. We don't want something to fall on deaf ears, right? Because it will be unheard, it will be unacted on, it will be ignored. So people who are deaf, we can ignore them. That may be a way to interpret that. We can ignore people who are blind. We can avoid people who are blind because we don't want the blind leading us, right? That's not right. We do want the blind leading us. We want people we want everybody to be involved. Going back to that earlier slide, what do people with disability want? We want opportunity. We want love. We want respect. We want pay raises, if anybody's listening. That's another joke. That's a bad one. So don't use phrases that were once used as diagnosis, right? I've used one already a lot tonight, and I said I wouldn't use it again. But what's another? Well, lunatic, idiot, crazy. Words like that are very, very, very insulting. They're very, very disrespectful.
Retard.
Retard. I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because when we worked at the Trailblazers, our best player then was the best player in franchise history, Damian Lillard. And he is a representative of Special Olympics International. And Special Olympics used to have this program called Spread the Word to End the Word. And what they were saying is, don't say the R word. Don't use it. And one night, again, it was a Monday night in March against the Atlanta Hawks, my job was to invite fans to sign a pledge to not use that word. And more than 10,000 people signed the pledge that night. I didn't think anybody would sign it. I've never been more busy in my life, right? But the other thing that happened that was really, really cool, at least in my experience, was internally, we all took that pledge. Because we didn't want to get on Dame's bad side. He's a super nice guy, but you don't want to get him mad, right? And we stopped using it internally. People made a point to not say it. And it changed the organization, I think. It became a better place to work. It became a friendlier place to work, right? And it was several years after that before I heard that word again. Seriously, I didn't hear it. And then one day I was at OHSU doing a presentation a lot like this. It was very early in the morning, and the person who greeted me, I said, "How's your day going?" And the person said, "Traffic was," right? Traffic was our word, did. Right? And I was taken aback. Literally, you said that. You're a medical professional and you said that. And then what I said was, there are about 3 billion better ways to say traffic was really bad.
Yeah.
A really simple way, in fact, is to say traffic was really bad. I can tell you that to getting here tonight, traffic was really bad. Right? So words matter. Words really, really, really matter. I have seen people reduced to tears in just hearing words like lunatic, like those other words that used to be used in diagnosis, right? So let me ask you a question. What is the most famous phrase ever said by a person from this country? It's a terrible question. I'm going to tell you who I think it was. I think it was Neil Armstrong. I think he said something when he landed on the moon. Allegedly. I mean, come on, landed on the moon? Kidding. So he lands on the moon, and what does he say? What does he say?
One step for, one leap for.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Okay. Now, I can tell you that when he said that, that was after I got hurt, I could do neither of those things. I still can't. We've been through that. Right? But the concept of ableism didn't really exist then. But was that phrase ableist? It's exclusionary, right? He's talking to people, a lot of people who can't do that. Right?
And what would you have him say instead?
I would have him say that because I think that's a wonderful phrase, right? But language changes like everything else does. Yes, sir.
Growing up with a lot of these things that we've heard and lived with, without putting this kind of connotation to it, in this case, what should he have said?
Well, so I'm gonna contradict everything else I said. I can't think of a better way to express wonderment that what he experienced.
That's the point, I guess,
Right.
is the fact that there are ways of saying things, but some people take them personally that shouldn't be taken personally.
Well, why shouldn't they?
Well, again, that's the question.
Right. So I don't think he meant anything. I'll get right to you. I don't think he meant anything negative by it. But if he said it today, he would suffer because we have evolved and we see things differently now. Right? Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that, just as you mentioned, that language changes over time. There's also that consideration that a person with a disability recognizes that a person without a disability is, say, linguistically impaired with regard to their understanding of other conditions. Right?
Possibly, sure.
So that is kind of that meeting place where we all recognize that we have our own biases, and there are many cognitive biases.
Right.
Ableism is maybe one set of them.
Absolutely, but it's something that I've given you examples tonight of phrases that were never intended to be hurtful, but absolutely now are hurtful, right? And it's things that we can learn, and it's my theory that unless society starts learning that language, starts believing in this concept of language, that in 30 years when we get back together. I'm going to be here in 30 years. Okay, so in 30 years when we get back together, the segment of society that is least educated and least employed will still be people with disabilities. In 30 years if we don't start learning this. Because, and I see I'll be right with you, until people with disabilities feel they belong, they won't belong. Yes, ma'am.
I was called out by one of my dearest friends on words. It happened to be ethnicity, so that was done. But until you are hit between the eyes with something that offends you, you're not going to change. It's the education, it's things like this that bring it. Oh, I didn't know that was offensive. I didn't realize I said that.
Right.
My friend that had called me out said, well, now, Diane, she said, how would you like me to describe you as my disabled friend? And I said, well, Phyllis, I am your friend and I am disabled. But part of it is generational.
Absolutely.
Now, you're young. I'm older. I've been in the chair, not as long as you have. But it's up to us to educate them. They don't know sometimes they do.
Right.
As a rule, they don't realize what they said.
Right. So when somebody says something to me, my assumption that could be offensive, my assumption is that they don't mean to be offensive. Right? And it's an opportunity for me to educate, just as I tried to educate the person who experienced really bad traffic, right? That's an opportunity, right? And I don't think that she meant anything by it.
No, but it was a teaching experience.
Right.
Somebody that you care deeply about has smacked you like your mom.
Right.
You're not going to do that anymore.
Right.
So it made me very aware. And like I said, education is the only way we're going to move because we don't like change.
Right.
We don't like change.
Right. And it's harder to accept change, in my experience, The older I get, the harder it is to it's not the way it was when I was your age. I say to my daughter 17, 18 times a day. She loves it though.
Yeah, what I would say is to go off what Diane's saying, we didn't learn it K through 12. I mean, there was no curriculum, I'm way past that point. We're still not learning it. I don't know if our kids K through 12 are learning the language properly. Some of it is, some of it's not in a lesson in your English lit class.
Yep.
That's the issue. So my solution would be that it needs to be integrated into K through 12. And beyond that, when we get to education, at that point, if you're still using it, then you deserve a smack in the face. Obviously I'm being metaphorical here, but I don't use can do and will do anymore. I haven't for years because an Asian person told me that was offensive to their people that were in camps who were made fun of because they said will do, can do because they didn't know good English. Okay? I don't use it anymore.
Good,
but
great.
when someone says will do, I'm not like, oh, they're racist, right?
Right.
But once I tell them,
I'm sorry, could you clarify that? Because I didn't know that was.
yeah, once I tell them you should not use will do or can do because it has historical connotations to Asian Americans who are immigrants being made fun of because they didn't speak good English. That's where it comes from. That's honestly right. Yes.
The words will do
Yeah.
is based on Asian Americans in concentration camps?
It's very unorthodox language use in the English language if you just analyze it. But with that said, now that you've told us about using, I can't tell you the amount of times per day that somebody describes things with crazy.
Yeah, and it's hard not to.
Yeah.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
I'm gonna refrain from trying to use that.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you, never know who in the room has dealt with something that's challenging mentally, right?
And I'll share that I spent more time at OHSU trying to help a single person by teaching I taught his coworkers not to say that word, not to say words like that word, because it would affect him in a way that was traumatic, right? And it was really bad. And so I try not to use that word. It's very hard because it's one of those things that we learn to use. But you guys are being perfect because you're playing into a lot of.
What word was that?
Are you trying to trick me? The word that crazy. I try not to use the word crazy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's really built into so many.
It is. So I think language reflects attitudes, because it was not that long ago when that hospital I kept talking about had that name, and that attitude was that kids with disabilities would not be empowered, would not be able to achieve, would never have jobs, would never go to school, would never live full lives, right? How could they? They're kids with disabilities. But things have changed, and language has changed, and language reflects that, right? I'm here tonight, and I want to recognize City of Wilsonville for letting me have this opportunity to talk about disability in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Because it's really easy to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion and not include disability. It is super easy, and most people don't do it. So hats off to Wilsonville. So society is changing, I think. Yes?
This be more of a cultural change then, because to change the culture or the background or where it came from type thing would be what needs to be looked at.
To change the culture? Absolutely, right? But and language leads. I think language leads changing in culture. I think that if we get away from so much ableism, if we get more towards respectful language, whether it's to disability or anybody else, right? If people are included to participate, are welcome to participate, if they are given access, everything changes, right? That's my theory, and that's what I'm basing my career on. So keep your fingers crossed. So as disabilities become more prominently featured and portrayed in media, I think that helps a lot. There was a woman actor. some call those actresses, who won a Tony Award a couple of years ago. She couldn't get on the stage, right? That's a big miss, right? So, but what a talent. And we see that talent, see this person achieve those things. And you can think of lots of examples of people with disabilities who have done wonderful things. I won't slide them. I won't talk about them. But so let's talk about a different way to think about disability. People with disabilities are experts in their abilities. We're experts in navigating a world that is not built for us to be included, right? So we're really good at stuff like this. Does everybody know what a curb cut is? Not everybody does. A curb cut is the ramp at the sidewalk that allows a person to, instead of stepping onto a sidewalk, to roll up or walk up the ramp rather than walk up a step, right? And so those were invented in the 40s, right? But what happened once those were invented is, guess what? Everybody started using them, not just people with disabilities, right? That was a bonus. And the curb cut effect is the idea that things that people with disabilities bring to the modern culture benefits everybody, right? A good example is this concept, working from home. Okay, so when I was at OHSU, my department handled what's called the reasonable accommodation. Can a person with a disability do the essential functions of a job with or without accommodation? The most requested accommodation before the pandemic at OHSU was to work from home. Guess what the most rejected accommodation request before the pandemic was? To work from home. Can't be done. Suddenly, though, when everybody has to work from home, guess what? It can be done. Wow, what a shocker, right? And what happened during the pandemic was that people with disabilities who wanted to work, who were told that they could only work in an office setting, suddenly don't have to work in an office setting. And guess what happened? The number spiked. People with disabilities started getting hired at a much faster rate. Guess what's happening now when everybody has to go back to the office? It's not good. It's not good. So it's frustrating. And that's just an effect of COVID, I think, right? The rush back to normal. Well, normal wasn't so good for a lot of us, right? So other examples of the curb cut effect: work from home, actuated doors. You know what an actuated door is? The door with a button, right? Or the wave actuated. I'm a really lazy person. I love the wave, because you wave at the door and it opens. I'm super magical. Okay, and the third one that I'm going to reference is a little bit awkward and a little bit embarrassing, and I apologize, but it's true. The wider bathroom stall. Who doesn't love a wider bathroom stall? You're welcome. Well, the airlines are another thing. So let's talk about takeaways. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things. So each person with a disability is unique and has had unique experiences. Okay, that's true. We're not all the same. We're just not. You and I we're both wheelchair users. Your wheelchair is nice. I have black spokes on mine. Slimming. They are slimming. Okay? Right? And this wheelchair is called an ultralight wheelchair. I've got an ultralight wheelchair with slimming spokes. That is the very definition of a midlife crisis.
What's the post-midlife?
I don't know. I'll worry about that when I get there. So adult to adult, don't.
You put cars with the clipping on your wheels too?
Not anymore. Not anymore. I used to do that. So here's a takeaway. Adult to adult, when you're talking to adult, don't lead with a disability. Right? Hey, what's wrong with you? I'll tell you what's wrong with me, but who cares? Right? I've got a spinal cord injury at level T10. That's the least interesting thing you're ever going to learn about me. Right? So get to know the person. Find a commonality. Who here likes coffee? It's a great thing to lead with. Hey, you like coffee? Bam. Now you're talking. Okay, adult to adult. But, and this is going back to something you said earlier, sir, if you have kids, if you know kids, if you work with kids, tell them two things. One, it's okay to look, okay? And two, it's okay for kids to ask, what's wrong with you, right? So my example on that is, when I first got hurt, I lived in a really, really small town in southern Indiana. And one night, this is very ableist, I was out for a walk with my dad. I was in my wheelchair, he was pushing me, we were out for a walk. Sometimes I'm ableist. And the most amazing thing happened. In this very, very small town in the early 1970s, I saw another person in a wheelchair. I had never seen, outside of a hospital setting, another person in a wheelchair. It was amazing. In the 70s, in a really, really small town, one stoplight. What do you think my dad said to me? He said, don't stare. Right? He said, don't stare. Okay? So here's the way a kid's mind and my mind think. Still, when Dad said, don't stare, what I heard was, don't look. Because I knew that the second I looked, he would say, I told you not to stare, now you're in trouble. Right? So don't stare became, don't look. Now, what's the first lesson in this culture that we teach kids to do? What do they have to do before they talk to someone? Look at them, right? So right there that day, Dad said, don't stare. I heard don't look and don't talk to, right? And I'm certain that I've told my daughter that. I'm certain that I have. Not since I've been doing this work. But if we're being honest, and I hope we are, if I asked who else has said that, everybody would raise their hand. Because that's what we do. Don't stare becomes don't look becomes don't talk to. And you know what happened as a result of that? I got a job at a world-leading academic medical center teaching people who are a lot smarter and a lot more well-educated than I am, that it's okay to look at people with disabilities and it's okay to talk to people with disabilities. Right? So what's happened as a result of that? My experience. So I tell my kid, it's okay to look, it's okay to ask, right? And I used to go visit her at her school in Southeast Portland, where we live, and when she was in elementary school, and I'd go hang out with her at lunch hour, and kids would come up to me and say, hey, Mr. J, why are you in the wheelchair? What's wrong with your legs? Why don't your legs work? Right? And they'd ask me 5, 10, and I'd answer them all. I'd answer every question they had. After about 10 questions, they would move on to another question, another topic that was in no way related to disability. It was always the same question. What was that question?
Do you like coffee?
How much longer is recess? Okay, so they had everything they needed to know about me and my chair, and then they moved on. We still live in that neighborhood. I still see some of those kids. They've never once brought up the disability or the wheelchair. They do, however, when we're at the ice cream store, say, Mr. J, do you really need more ice cream? Kids can be mean, okay? So, any questions about that? So we can be change agents for the future by telling kids that, right? Because kids are nice and kids are curious and kids learn bad habits from us. And one bad habit is don't stare, don't look, don't talk to. Okay?
My wheelchair is a kid magnet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're so easy. They
Right.
get the questions out and then they go on.
They move on, right. So, open a conversation, like with coffee, something you have in common. Or I'm wearing a blue shirt tonight, but when I worked at OHSU, I always wore blue shirts. So if I saw somebody I didn't know and they were wearing a blue shirt, I'd say, hey, where'd you get that blue shirt? Or why aren't you wearing a blue shirt? What, do you got no taste? Anyway, a mobility device, a wheelchair, a scooter, crutches, are part of the person's body. Don't touch it without their permission, right? And that's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to learn. Don't give me help unless I ask for help, right? Or you can ask. You can say, hey, Ian, do you need some help? And I'll say, no, thank you, I'm good. Or sometimes I'll say, yes, please, do my homework for me. So don't touch without permission. Talk to the person who uses an ASL interpreter don't talk to the interpreter. Look at the person, don't look to the interpreter. Don't talk to or touch a person's service animal. Here's a quiz, 2 types of service animals. 2 types of animals can be service animals. Does anybody know what they are?
Dog and horse.
Close. Dog is one, absolutely. Miniature horse.
Okay.
Seeing eye animals. Miniature horse. True fact. Okay, people with disabilities would rather be offended than excluded, right? If you say something that I find offensive, at least we're talking, right? But if you're thinking, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm not going to talk to Ian, then I can't participate. So when somebody says something to me that is ableist or disrespectful or, hey, how'd you get hurt? I'll tell them, but at least then we're talking, right? So much rather be offended than excluded. The person you are talking to, if that person has a disability, we don't likely know your friend who has a disability, right? We don't likely. So I met here's the story why I say don't likely. So I was talking to a guy who I knew just a very little bit. We had exchanged, he went to the same law school I did. But he's a lot younger and years before, and he moved out to Portland, and so he asked if I knew anybody, and then we fell out of touch, and then we had a meeting the other day, and we were talking and having a good time, and he said, you know, my best friend uses a wheelchair, and he also rides a bike, and in the back of my head, I thought, wow, that sounds like this guy I used to play wheelchair basketball with, named so-and-so. So I said, is it so-and-so? And he said, yeah, that's my best friend. Do you really know everybody? So we don't. It was a fluke. And again, people with disabilities are experts in their abilities. Let's recap. So treat people with dignity and respect. Simple, super simple. Whether they have a disability or not, treat them with respect. Be nice, be kind. It's not that hard for me. Anyway, get to know the person, not the disability. If we're hanging out and my disability comes up, great. Just don't lead with it, all right? That's me, right? And language matters and it evolves. And so here's the thing. This is a language. These are new languages to you, likely. Ableism, bad. Person first, good, right? Identity first, good. If you get it wrong, that's okay. It's hard to learn a language. Hard for me. Years and years of German. Nothing. I got nothing. I'm terrible at language. This is a hard thing to learn. Give yourself grace. Give yourself the power to be wrong. And don't dwell on it, move on, right? It's just like with pronouns. It's just like with pronouns. Don't dwell on it. So if you're interested in other things about Relay, here's some stuff that we do. I know we're close on time, so I won't, I almost said run through them, but that would be perfect. So there you go. There's my contact information. I'm happy to hang out and chat more. You can tell I like to talk. Question?
Goodwill's been noted for working with people with disabilities and finding jobs and having job fairs and all that.
Yep.
What other companies do that?
What other companies? Lots of other companies. Lots of other companies. There's this thing called supported employment where agencies will work with people with disabilities to find jobs for them. They'll work with the state, vocational rehab, find jobs, but there are lots of companies around that are doing that. There's a big movement to get people with disabilities working. We were talking about some frustrations with this movement earlier. I personally want to work full-time. I'm capable of working full-time, so I work full-time. Lots of people with disabilities don't have that mindset. They've never been given the power to think about their potential because they've been held down, right? So we're going to change all that, and the next generation is going to figure it all out.
A little too late for me. I was a teacher.
Well, with that attitude, you're right.
And they said, according to our church, you're totally disabled. You can't teach. And I said, what do I have to teach with my legs? You know.
Right. No, but it's it's a fair question. So I always tell people that I'm married and have a kid because lots of people wouldn't have thought that possible. Lots of people are surprised that I have a job. Sometimes I take that personally, That's a joke. Not a very good one. Happy to answer any questions or hang out and.
I wonder if you can teach us, communicate to those of us who are not as aware as you are about all these unique aspects. What does it take for a person to feel like their disability is not a disability? I mean, you've obviously got a job and you're doing relatively well talking to the rest of us. What kind of societal circumstances do you think are needed that makes a person with a disability feel like, so I'm different than you, but I can do things too?
Well, I've been as lucky as they come. My family has been very supportive and encouraging and tough from time to time. I've had great friends like Bill, great friends all along, and there have been champions in my life who have made sure I had access. So it's and I mean, I can't tell you how lucky I am. There's absolutely nothing special about anything about me at all, other than I've had an incredibly lucky friends and family and support. And how do we get that? We get that by, so when I first got hurt, 26 miles from a hospital, a state trooper picked me up. I was unconscious, picked me up, put me in the back of his patrol car. This was 1969. Didn't belt me in and drove 26 miles to the closest hospital. My parents showed up at that hospital and the doctor said, institutionalize that boy. He's never going to learn to sit up. He's never going to learn to feed himself. He's going to be a burden on your family. So my parents said, what's the worst that can happen if we don't listen, right? Let's take a shot. So they saw potential. They saw an opportunity. There's no way that was the smart thing to do, but I'm so glad they did it, right? So they saw potential. See potential in somebody. Don't see somebody. I like to say, don't see the disability in a person, because you don't know what that means, right? So you can find endless examples of people with disabilities, all kinds of disabilities, who have done things that no one would have ever thought possible, except them, and maybe their friends, and maybe their support system that thought possible. So, be encouraging. Don't dismiss somebody because they're in an ultralight wheelchair with slimming spokes. see the potential in them. Sorry.
Well, it's not as much of a problem as it used to be, but I really encourage all of you here, if you know families, friends, neighbors that has a person who is challenged in some area, is to make sure you encourage them to get out in the public, because it's important to educate the public so that people know. People know that we're all together. We are one person, and that we all have abilities, and we all have a way to live. And you're showing people that yes, we might have a situation or problem, but we still can live your life to the fullest.
All right. So it may be a problem, but it may be an opportunity, right? And I mean, I've been able to see things and do things and experience things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. And so you just never know what a person's capable of, but everybody should have the chance to determine that.
Well, I wanted to, say a big, or just observe that a benefit of this gathering here is that whether some of us have any various descriptions of being a person with some disability or not, we came together to learn about it. So everybody that's here came forward to learn about it. And that's what's really cool about this. And so I think you asked what more can we do, and I guess, how do we get more people to step forward to learn more about it?
Well,
language, the whole thing.
So it's not, in my opinion, it's not that hard to talk to someone, right? Now, I'm very outgoing, and so it's my thing, right? And for some people it is, but literally it can be as simple as, so here's a story, and this absolutely happened. I was at OHSU I'd been there about a month, and I was in the big hospital building. I was at one end of the very longest hall at OHSU, right? And as I was going up the hall, nobody would make eye contact with me. And I had a new blue shirt on. I was fully caffeinated. It was a good day. Things were going my way, but nobody would look at me. And I thought, well, maybe whatever. It's early. They're not caffeinated. But I was going on, and then I saw a guy up ahead who was in a hospital-issued wheelchair. And at OHSU, you have to, if you're a patient, you have to use a hospital-issued wheelchair. You can't push yourself. And this person was in one of those wheelchairs. He had on a hospital gown, a bathrobe, slippers, and he was sitting not in the middle of the hall, but on the side of the hall. And it was a perfectly beautiful day, but he wasn't looking out the window. He was sitting there kind of like this. So I thought, well, he's missing a perfectly beautiful day. He looks like he's having a bad day. Maybe he's a patient getting ready for a surgery or something. So I did something, and I told you not to do this, but this is what I did. What's that?
You tested wheelchair?
No, I stared at him. I just stared at him. I was walking towards him and stared at him. And when somebody is staring at you, sometimes you can sense it, right? And I think that he sensed it, that somebody was looking at, and he kind of looked up and he was kind of surly, who's staring at me? And it was me, right? And the second we locked eyes, I nodded at him and I smiled. And I don't know if it was the only time that day that somebody had done that, just 2 simple gestures, well, 3 if you count staring, but 2 simple gestures, right? Cost me nothing. It didn't negatively impact my day, right? In fact, it positively impacted my days, because when I smiled at him, he smiled back at me, right? And just for a second, he felt welcome. Just for a second, he felt like he belonged. And it can be that simple. And I say simple for me because that's me, right? But it changed my day because I actually felt better. I was having a great day, fully caffeinated, clean blue shirt, sun was out. It was great, but I felt better.
What's your model for everyday resources, though? With love or?
Culture of love.
Culture of love.
Culture of love.
To me, that's what it comes down to.
And if society would embrace that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Culture of love. Oh,
Yep.
Well, with that, I'm going to end it. Before we go, a few thank yous. One to you, sir.
Thank you.
For coming and embracing us. To Willamette Falls Studios for filming this, and they'll get it our way in a couple weeks, and we'll push it out so more people can see it. If you happen to see it, once we share it, please share it with people. I think it's a great educational tool. Would like to thank Columbia Distributing for providing us with water, local business, helping make this 5-event series possible. This was the last of our 5 events, but we are in the process of sort of seeking new topics. So there's a page on letstalkwilsonville.com, which is our city's engagement website, where if you have an idea for a topic or something you want to learn more about, let us know. Also, a quick thank you to the DEI committee for putting this series together. Imran and Diane are here from that committee tonight. Thank you. And Mayor Fitzgerald for putting the DEI committee in a position to do this work. So thank you, everybody.